I believe we are waiting for the audio to start for the quorum courtroom for the members that are in person. And once we get that going, then JP Lemming will start our meeting. Okay, JP Lemming, we're
Yes,
getting
sir.
back. Somebody has a phone up or something that needs to be muted. Just to remind all of you present in the quorum courtroom that those microphones that are set up, those little ones on those tables, they are very sensitive. They can hear you whisper. And so just keep that in mind as we go. But JP Lemming, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, if we're ready to go, let's get started. The Jail and Law Enforcement Committee meeting is called to order. Butch, would you lead us in prayer and faith, please?
We thank you, Heavenly Father, for the blessing being here today. Represent the big voice of the people of Washington County. Pray that we find you in all our words. Thank you for your grace, for the freedom that allowed to us to represent Washington County and the citizenship of this county. All this in the name of Jesus. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Miss Patty, would you call roll, please?
Patrick Deacons,
Here.
Sam Duncan,
Here.
Ann Harbison,
Here.
Lance Johnson, Willie Lemming, here, Chandra Washington,
Here.
and Judith Yanez.
Here.
JP Lemming, we have a quorum.
At this time, we need to adopt the agenda or any changes to the agenda.
I think there was miscommunication. I would like to strike agenda item number 5 and 6 are essentially the same.
So item 5. Okay.
JP Lemming, can I interrupt you guys for a sec? We're still getting a lot of feedback. There's either Sam, who's there with IT, the computer, the laptop that is up, the mic needs to be muted or taken off and the sound turned down because we're having a hard time understanding what y'all are saying due to all the feedback.
We're working on that now. We're still getting feedback. Brian, does that sound any better or is it still bad?
It's a little bit better, but we're still hearing some feedback. I don't know if they're from the TVs. The volume on the TVs probably are causing some of that feedback.
Please turn the volumes all the way down.
Well, there's still one thing else in there, I believe, that is causing some feedback then.
What would it be, you think?
Hey, Lisa. The volume is small.
Yes, I don't think we do.
This I have to
Brian, is that any better?
No, we're still getting it.
We still have IT working on it.
Brian, can we turn off the TVs temporarily to see if that's it?
Absolutely.
IT's working on it. Gotta turn them all down.
They're all down.
I muted you guys, so Sam, you'll have to unmute them because of all the squelching that was going on.
Let's do good. I turn it off the TV. Try now. Can anyone hear us? Anyone hear us?
Still echoing.
There's a message here that those trying to dial in can't get in.
Yeah, like what Sue said, it looks like there are panelists trying to get in.
They can't get in.
Right.
I don't think we can hold a meeting under these circumstances.
Just all jump on Zoom.
Well, Sam is doing drumming lessons in the next room for music, so y'all come on over.
We can't hear that.
I can. Ooh.
Well, if the public is denied access, we can't have a meeting. I'd like to ask our county attorney if everybody can see the chats or not.
I think the county attorney stepped away.
Yeah, I think he went downstairs to work on this.
Okay.
Did we test this beforehand?
Good question.
Oh, he's back. Ask him.
Okay, Brian, I'm concerned if the public can't access this, if we can legitimately have a meeting,
If the public can't access what?
our meeting.
The public has access to our meeting. There's
We got a message from someone that says people who are registered and have a link aren't being able to get in.
I
No
don't
password.
know what to tell them. We've got 22 people who are on right now. Did they go through the county's website?
It's
No
saying they
password.
registered and got a link and call-in numbers, but no password.
And they said yes, they went to the county website, but they need a password.
I'm a little bothered by the chats, Brian.
There's a numeric password. Well,
How do the chats comply with FOIA?
The link when used on the phone states
The
that
chat.
whole link is invalid. It's the next message we got was the link when used on the phone states that the whole link is invalid.
There's a comment from IT that says if they registered after the meeting started, then there was an issue, but he's fixed it so they can try again.
In theory, we could all call it.
Yes.
We could all Zoom like everybody's. We can just call it.
Frankly, I think this worked better when we were all on the same platform.
Oh,
Still echoing.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, if you're in a valley of mountains around you, you're echoing. Just curious if there's computers there they can use and we could just do Zoom.
Hello?
I think that's a lot better. I think we're good to go. Thanks, Sydney.
Does it sound normal, Brian?
Yes, yes. You're finally coming through on the speakerphone and not through a computer, which
Can
was
we
the
turn this
problem.
volume up just a little bit?
So you're
Sam,
Sam can turn the volume up on the conference phone there. I'll be able to hear.
You got a career in IT. Okay, Brian, can you speak to us? Because we couldn't hear you very good there.
Yes, we can hear y'all a lot better. I'm not getting any echo. Can you hear me well?
Okay, we got a little bit more glitch here. We're gonna try a little bit more, then we'll be ready to roll, I think. Okay. Let's try to get this meeting on. Let's turn it down just a little bit. I think that's the problem. Can you hear us, Brian?
I can, and there's a little bit of an echo, and it's not the phone causing the echo. Somebody in the room has a device that's on that's connected to the meeting, and that's where the echo's coming from.
Everybody turn everything off.
Let me turn this TV off.
I don't think there's anything here that's on.
Okay, that's a lot better. I think you can go ahead.
Okay. Well, we'll back up to the adoption of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda, I asked? And Patrick said he wanted to take out number 5. Did I hear any?
Sam. Second.
We had a motion and a second. Motion by Ann and second by Sam to strike number 5.
Point of order, Mr. Lemming, when he made that motion, we didn't hear what he said or the rationale for it. So would you mind
Okay,
repeating?
we'll back up, start over. Is that what you want?
No, if you could just repeat the motion and the rationale. We didn't hear that part.
Okay, I'll let Patrick repeat what he wanted to do. Patrick?
And can we get the agenda on the screen for the public, please?
No, the agenda will not be, there will not be anything on the screen other than the PowerPoint presentation by Michelle Cern. All of that information can be found on the website.
Okay. Patrick?
a motion to strike item number 5 from the agenda. The discussion point is item number 6. The materials are all for item number 6. So I feel that item number 5 is redundant.
Hearing.
Okay, now I need a motion or motion to approve or.
I move to strike number 5 from the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Move to adopt.
yeah,
I move to adopt the agenda as amended.
Second.
we had a motion to adopt the agenda. We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now let's go to the National Center for State Courts presentation. Number 4.
Give me a sec while I add Michelle Cern as a panelist so she can prepare her report.
Sam, could you mute us and turn the volume up during this presentation? They still have questions.
Do we have that for now?
Hey, Michelle, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, are you able to share your screen at this point?
I should be able to. I also have 2 co-presenters who will need to be added to speak.
Yes, ma'am. And who are they?
Karen Albert and Patrick Jablonski. But I'm the only one who will be sharing.
Okay, we are getting them added as panelists as we speak. They'll be able to unmute themselves and speak whenever they need to.
Fabulous. There's Karen. And there's Patrick. Fabulous. Okay. And you can see my screen. Are we good?
Good.
Did I lose audio?
No, you're good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. I would like to thank you so much for having us on your agenda this afternoon, this evening, to present the findings of the criminal justice system assessment. We understand we have a half an hour of your time, and so we're going to spend half of that on, not even half of that, on the work that we've done, and then a good amount of time on the recommendations, going through the key pieces of our report. But I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to present, and also for all of the justice system stakeholders that we've spoken to, whether on site, by the phone, via email, for being so accessible and willing to work with us on this important project. As I said, I have 2 co-presenters, Karen Albert and Patrick Jablonski. They were both integral parts of our team, and I will not, unfortunately, hand it over to them to do introductions. We can just jump right on into our PowerPoint. So our project goal, the goal was to assist Washington County with an assessment of the criminal justice system, really to focus on understanding the nature and dynamics of the offender population and understanding how the changing dynamics of your area and the growth in your area will affect planning elements within the justice system. So starting with an overview of the work that we've done. So our methodology, without getting too detailed, because you all have gotten the report, we used a combination of on-site observation and interviews and data collection and literature reviews, and looking at existing organizational and administrative data. So we looked at court data, we looked at jail data, we looked at ACIC data, we looked at existing reports, previous reports that have been done, any information that we could glean. And then, as I said, we reviewed and analyzed custody and court data. So we wanted to understand processes, how cases were moving through the system, who is moving through the system, identify looking at the key points within the criminal justice system, what's happening there, and then also to develop a statistically valid time series to forecast jail population for the future. Again, sort of restating, but a little bit more detail for you all who are seeing the presentation and who are present. We visited Washington County in February. We spent 3 days on site interviewing stakeholders, touring facilities, collecting additional information than what we had prior to hitting the ground. We had a team of 4 individuals there and were really, really able to collect the information that we needed, ask the questions that we needed to ask so that we could move on to the next step, which is conducting the data analysis, including program utilization of services that are available in the community, and work on future projections for your jail and for your community, with a particular focus on the 7 key decision points within the criminal justice system, specific to the sequential intercept model, which we'll get into a little bit here tonight, but really is included in depth in the report in the appendix. We go through each of the 7 points and identify what services are available, what community linkages are available, what happens within that point on the map. So just a big visual here from the report, which is overwhelming to look at first glance. But what we did is we mapped the movement of an offender through the criminal justice system, through the Washington County criminal justice system, and all of the potential options and things that could happen to someone at each of the points. So we're not going to go through this, but I just wanted to note that this is one of the pieces that we did work on and that we did complete for you. And really to help educate, I think what we learned is that a lot of individuals who live this every day are very good and very knowledgeable of their piece of the system and how it works and what happens and what influences it. But we did learn a little bit about how maybe some additional exposure to the additional decision points would be helpful to the justice system stakeholders. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we get further on. I mentioned the sequential intercept model. And again, not wanting to spend a lot of time on this, but to show you this is a resource that we developed for you for each of the 7 intercepts that talk about resources, what happens at each decision point, and also our report does identify some gaps at each point. So just again, a resource to have for you to review, to look at, and to identify some areas of future work or to help with assessment of the gaps as your county grows. We did add 1 task to the project in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We didn't think it would be responsible of us to complete the work and to complete the project without acknowledging that this is taking place. And so we conducted some follow-up interviews, a virtual site visit as we refer to it, to understand what different individuals, different stakeholders within the system had put into place, what changes had occurred in response to the pandemic. And when Karen and I were here last time, we talked about this a little bit, but again, wanted to note it so that we could identify any innovations, any changes that are worthy of institutionalization. So we could look at changes that were put into place that maybe were going to be recommendations that we were going to put forward as part of the report. And so then we wanted to just, like I said, make sure we documented things and adjust appropriately. We're going to move on to the findings and recommendations section. A note before I turn this over to Patrick is that the findings and recommendations on the screen here tonight are not going to be in the same order as the report. We grouped them a little bit differently here so that we could present them as succinctly as possible. And I also want to note that not all recommendations or all of the details underneath the recommendation are presented tonight. We wanted to just make sure that we were able to present things succinctly and allow enough time and enough opportunity to talk through really the key recommendations and then the big pieces of the project. So with that, I will turn it over to Patrick. Patrick able
Okay,
to unmute, Brian?
now I can unmute. Thank
There
you.
you go.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It is really an honor to speak with you tonight. It's a very strange feeling to be sitting in my living room and to know so much about your system and not be able to talk to you about it in the same room. So I hope, despite technology and being in another state, that I can communicate some important things to you tonight. I'm really hopeful that our findings and in the report and our comments to you this evening help lay the groundwork for system improvement and in process improvement. I've seen many of these same issues solved in a variety of jurisdictions. And I know that with cooperation, the topics that we have highlighted can be solved in Washington County. In fact, cooperation and coordination define our first set of findings and recommendations, which we see on our next slide.
Hang on. Let's try this again. Let's see. We're going to stop and start over.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Okay. I will at this time echo Patrick's sentiment about not being present. Okay. Come on, computer. Now I just need to fix my view here. Can you see it?
Yes.
With notes or without notes?
Seeing everything.
Okay. Better?
Much better. Can you go backward one slide?
Sure can. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, cool. As I was saying, cooperation and coordination is a common theme in almost every jurisdiction where I have worked or have helped out and done projects similar to this. Washington County is absolutely no different than anywhere else that I've been. And what we see is, frankly, at this point, a relative lack of coordination across the criminal justice system. This was a common comment and something that our team saw on site during the visit in February. And so based on that and some other things that we saw, our first recommendation constitutes what I consider, what our whole team considers to be a critical foundation for many, if not every single one of our recommendations. And that is simply this, that Washington County should develop and implement a criminal justice coordinating committee, or a CJCC. What we're suggesting is this would be a freestanding committee that is represented by every single important stakeholder in the system. And it would be represented at the executive level, along with support staff. They would conduct regular meetings, they would have formal agendas, and they should use a data-guided approach to solve and discuss system issues. There should be clear trust and communication. It should be characterized by a spirit of collaboration. Following on the heels of this recommendation is that the county really ought to consider seeking technical assistance, such as from the National Institute of Corrections or NIC, to assist with the creation and really getting the CJCC off the ground. To where it's a regular meeting, say on a monthly basis, and then somebody can take reins and run the CJCC. Speaking frankly, I've seen a whole gamut, an entire spectrum of effectiveness for these committees. The committees that succeed and the jurisdictions that succeed are the ones who commit to cooperation and clear communication, and they have a commitment among the stakeholders. Frankly, I worked in Orange County, Florida, which is Orlando, as the jail statistician, which was a way of saying population coordinator for the county. This was between 2001 and 2006. When I got there, the CJCC was a committee where attendance was irregular, not very much was accomplished, and then it quickly, out of necessity and out of a spirit of cooperation, became a committee where things were solved efficiently. The quickest example that I can give you this evening was that we found a delay in commitment paperwork for individuals sentenced to state prison. It would take over a month for the jail to get a fully signed packet, which was necessary to take the human and put them in a state facility if that's where their sentence dictated they should go. What was happening was, after sentencing, the court would dismiss everybody and the clerk would send the judge the commitment packet. The judge would sign it and send it back to the clerk. The clerk would then send it to the state attorney, who would sign it, send it back to the clerk. The clerk would send it to the public defender or the defense counsel. They would sign it, it would go back to the clerk, then it would come to the jail. It was taking 33 days for us to move approximately 100 people a month to state prison. This problem existed for about 10 years. It was solved in about a 20-minute conversation at a CJCC meeting where everybody got on board with the new process. And the process was simply this, that when the judge pronounces the sentence in the courtroom or a plea agreement is struck, all parties sign the packet in the courtroom. And so we were able to cut that processing time from 33 days to 7 days, with 5 of those 7 days waiting for a space at the state prison. So frankly, not to put too fine a point on it, but where I have worked at Orange County, we went from 4,000 inmates with a capacity of 3,200 beds in 2001 to under 3,000 inmates, under our capacity, just 2 years later. It was done with no reduction in public safety. It was just better, more efficient processing. And none of that could have been accomplished without the CJCC. So our next slide talks about some deeper commitments to what happens at CJCC meetings, but really what becomes a portion of everyday life within the criminal justice system. One of the important topics that a good CJCC handles is reviewing data and using the data to drive policy and decision making. So in Orange County, Florida, what we were able to do is we ultimately built an integrated computer system that worked very well. For instance, on the street, a police officer at arrest would transmit the affidavit from the patrol car to the courts, and the courts and the jail would get notification that somebody was arriving. We literally had court dates scheduled prior to an arrestee arriving on the booking floor of the jail. Now that took a lot of time and a huge investment. In the meantime, what we were able to do was to informally solve data sharing problems. Another example that I have is just recently, I worked with a jurisdiction in the state of Tennessee where simply put, the probation system and the sheriff's jail data system did not talk to each other. And so what we had was that probation officers were spending a lot of time looking through the jail roster one by one, instead of supervising their caseload, which is what they're supposed to do. And they were looking for people who were arrested the night before in hope that they could find those people before they were released from jail. And so using the CJCC in that particular county, probation agreed to make a simple change into their system, which allowed them to have a shared field, which then allowed sharing of information. It cost no dollars to make that change. And the query was made. Jail and probation are instantly alerted in that jurisdiction when somebody is rearrested. Finally, at one point in my career, I was a jail population manager for the jail in Camden, New Jersey. This was just like Orlando and a lot of places I've worked. And during the regular meetings of their version of the CJCC, we would review criminal justice statistics. And this is our bottom recommendation on the screen. The important statistics that talk about the health and the ability of the system to process efficiently was something that every single individual in the criminal justice system knew about. And if something got out of sorts, they could react to it and try to fix it. Now, my next slide, I think, puts a finer point on some of the things that I've discussed so far. These recommendations, these are 6, 7, and 8 in this part of the presentation. They're very similar to some of the things that I've already just said. Transparent communication and clear roles build cooperation, which builds trust, and it reduces uncertainty. I've seen a spectrum of success with these committees. There are jurisdictions with whom I've worked where stakeholders have stopped attending meetings, or they do not include everyone, or the meetings break down due to arguments. These committees, oftentimes, when they're unsuccessful, they can operate with a cloud of suspicion towards each other. It does not have to be that way, and it doesn't work if it is not that way. That CJCC in Tennessee that I just told you about with the probation problem, when I arrived on site, their CJCC had stopped meeting. They had not had a meeting in 2 years. My team that I worked with went around and begged the stakeholders to come to a first meeting of a reconstituted committee. At the meeting, within 2 minutes, there was an instantaneous argument between the head of the jail and the public defender regarding access to inmates by the public defender. It was an issue that had been brewing for over a year. And as it turned out, once we were able to get people to say what was going on, it was a major miscommunication, and both parties felt the other was to blame. It got fixed that same evening. Frankly, without a clear mandate for communication and cooperation, I'm not sure when that problem would have been fixed. Now, I'm not saying that a CJCC is going to fix everything in Washington County, but I do know for a fact, and from my experience, and my team agrees, that a CJCC is absolutely an important foundation for improving the criminal justice system. Again, it was my honor to work on this project. I now turn the presentation over to my teammate, Karen Albert.
Thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm going to talk just a minute about the jail itself. And as you all know, it's no surprise, it's kind of the elephant in the room. Northwest Arkansas is really experiencing a tremendous amount of growth, both in business and in population. And if we stick with kind of a do-nothing approach, we're going to recognize that at some point, we're going to run out of space in the existing jail. And also some of the jurisdictions in Washington County are also relying a little bit heavier on the jail itself. So one of the first recommendations that we would have, and it supports what Patrick was talking about, is that we need to keep an eye on this population. And the jail is the most expensive option that you have in your jurisdiction. And so those are precious beds. And so we need to pay attention to who's in those beds, who needs to be in those beds, and what do we want to reserve those beds for? Because if we're going to run out of space with population growth, and the trend appears to be that as the population grows, so will the jail population. We're really going to need to keep an eye on that. I'm a firm believer that a jurisdiction can decide that, you're roughly at 250,000 residents. And so you can incarcerate 0 people, in which case you have to have a tremendous amount of resources in the community to manage that. Or you can incarcerate all 250,000 just to be sure that you're safe. But of course, that is extremely expensive, and it certainly doesn't recognize a tremendous amount of justice. So, one of the options, recognizing there may very well be additional needs for jail facilities, one of the options to consider might be a regional facility that could actually be on the same site and would relieve some of the other jurisdictions from their population growth and their jails as well. It generates potential revenue for Washington County, and it still pretty much keeps the management local. But this, ideally, you wouldn't even need to expand at all. So one of the options you can explore, which will be described a little bit on the next slide, is that right now there is no meaningful pretrial services programming in Washington County. And so what that does is it affords law enforcement officers one of 2 options: either seeing the release of people immediately following their incarceration, which the jail now has the authority from the prosecutor to be able to release some people based on their charges and their criminal history. So that release, or to incarcerate until someone is actually going through the court system, really doesn't allow you the monitoring you want and the opportunity to really manage this population. So what a pretrial program can do for you is allow for screening that is provided to both to all of the judiciary, including the public defender and the prosecutor, so that everyone can get an idea of who we're dealing with here. This information can be validated. The employment status, the longevity of their residence, all of this can be verified. And so you have good information when you're making decisions about bond or other release options, or whether someone needs to remain in jail. I share an experience of a jurisdiction that I worked with years ago, and the magistrate, it was a magistrate system. The magistrate was trying to help out with the jail population, so was lowering bonds for just about everyone. Well, because of that, they ended up with a significant increase in failed to appears, and kind of similar to what's happening in Washington County. Once you have someone who fails to appear, you want to make sure they're going to appear in court, so they end up staying in jail. Well, the opportunity for them to be monitored while in a pretrial and non-incarceration status can really be more effective. So you would use a validated risk assessment that would provide you good information and consistency amongst all of the defendants. And this would include follow-up reviews and checking in with folks, and are you remembering your court date and things along those lines, which seems simple to us, but yet some of the populations that we're dealing with, those just aren't high on the priority list as they're working through other issues. So while someone is in a release status on pretrial, there may be conditions set. They may be drug tested. They may have curfews. They might have electronic monitoring or whatever. But the pretrial program allows for monitoring these conditions. And again, if they are violating, then you address these violations. It also allows for appropriate treatment and options available in the community, so we can kind of keep them busy. If we can keep them productive and keep them busy, then perhaps they're not out committing other crimes. And the pretrial program also allows you to measure the impact at all levels. And so non-compliant folks, you can connect that to the risk assessment. And what did we learn in the risk assessment, and what opportunities do we have to either expand the program, improve the program, or kind of tighten it down a little bit if we needed to. So the next slide will kind of address some of the resources that are available to you. You have some great behavioral health resources in the county, and that I applaud you for that. And there has been a tremendous effort to address some of those issues. We think there are opportunities in looking at that initial contact with an arrestee, that a police officer has a variety of different options available rather than release to the streets or incarcerate. And so we would suggest connecting with the United Way is available to you, but also all of the services that are available to you in the community have a regional services guide, so that law enforcement has the opportunity to connect with this, to connect with these services that are available, and also help you identify gaps in some of the services. There are also opportunities for working with the community and economic development agencies to ensure that, you know, transportation is very good in some areas, but not as great in others. So if we have an expectation of folks engaging or getting to court, we need to make sure that those resources are available. We also talked about a mental health court. We know there's discussion already about that, and we would certainly recommend it. And you have increased your utilization of video visitation and court hearings due to COVID-19, but we would encourage that continuing where it's appropriate to do so, even after we've gotten a handle on this pandemic. So with that, I'm going to let Michelle kind of work through the next level and focus on the courts.
Thank you, Karen. All righty, so moving on to our last set of recommendations and some conclusions here for y'all. Again, we have findings, agency recommendations around the courts and around other agencies that again focus on collaboration and coordination and the sharing of information. And one thing that we recommend highly is for the Washington County judges to increase collaboration and coordination where appropriate, where allowed, by creating a court administrator or similar position that would allow for the coordination of the assignment of cases across branches, to develop some common operating procedures, to manage staff in courtroom, and to prepare routine reports for judicial officers, so that the judges are not having to routinely seek out information from the jail and go through things by hand, go through paper, but to be able to create some infrastructure and some routine of looking through information and receiving information, not only about their own caseloads, which I'm sure they do receive at this time, but also about local justice system operations and how, you know, what trends are occurring, what the jail's seeing, what probation's seeing, what law enforcement is seeing on the ground. Again, these types of things that really do, you know, bode well to supporting the operation of a CJCC, where this sort of exchange of information would become routine. Another court finding that we have is that we've learned that judicial officers and prosecution meet outside of the courtroom to discuss cases prior to initial hearings, and that communication, our recommendation is that communication, excuse me, should not be occurring outside of the courtroom and not on the record. So our recommendation is that those discussions can certainly continue to take place. Those pre-court meetings, though, should occur as part of the initial appearance and on the record, so that we can help increase some additional increased transparency there. Our last agency recommendation that we have right now is regarding public defender and caseloads and ratios and how public defenders are viewed in comparison to prosecutors in Washington County. which is not, unfortunately, not an uncommon observation, I think, that we've seen across in a lot of jurisdictions that we've worked with. But we really do encourage Washington County to look at caseload sizes, that there be a workload study conducted to help determine what would be appropriate, given the number of individuals and the resources that the public defender has available compared to cases and caseload sizes and weight of the caseloads. And also our second recommendation around this piece would be to ensure parity where possible between public defenders and prosecutors of the same experience and education levels to provide for some greater longevity and stability in the PD's office. That concludes the formal presentation of recommendations and findings. And I just want to take this opportunity to share some overarching observations and make some concluding remarks. I can't stress enough what Patrick said earlier about the CJCC, and that creating a CJCC really is the foundation to being able to implement the recommendations and strengthen system operations. Karen spoke about the pretrial services recommendation and about creating an infrastructure to manage arrestees and to manage that population, through case management and other monitoring based upon an individual's risk and needs. And that really, while it could be an overwhelming piece to implement within the system, it really does alleviate pressure and the huge cost related to the jail, as the jail is the most expensive option for managing arrestees, and it has the least effective outcome. So again, just to conclude here with some additional encouragement about data sharing and analysis so that you can be monitoring the population. You can know who's coming in and who's coming out and why, and then what's happening, right? What's happening upon pretrial release, what's happening upon sentencing and release from jail or from corrections, and what is happening to your justice system population. And with that, I would again like to thank you for the opportunity to present today. And I believe we have some time available for questions. I'm going to stop sharing, but please do feel free to contact any of us with any questions that you may have, or go through the quorum court, your appropriate channels.
Sam, can you unmute the quorum courtroom, please?
Brian, can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
I'd just like to say thank you for the team that done all that study. Any questions for anybody?
Feedback is really, really bad again.
Well, I don't know what they've changed. We got IT coming.
While they are doing that, are there any JPs on Zoom that have any questions that they would like to ask? We can go ahead and do that, and then they can still hear us in there and hear your questions and the responses, and then hopefully we'll get them back up where we can hear them. JP Yanez, I will attempt to unmute you.
Thank you for the report. I really enjoyed reading it, oddly enough. But I have a question. When you form committees, are racial disparities discussed? One of the issues that I find here in the area, anytime you attempt to have a conversation about racial disparities, it gets really uncomfortable. And so I'm used to, in just a broader projects discussing, and I work in education, just like the prison to pipeline disparities, looking at the data, but I don't find that in the area. So when you are in a committee, is that something that's discussed normally?
I will see if I can unmute. I don't know if you
Thank
guys
you.
did.
I'll take the first, I'll start the response, and then Patrick and Karen, if you have anything to add to it, that would be great. I think absolutely. So when the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, my experience with them is that they are, I don't want to say similar to a quorum court because they're a little bit different, but they do still have a committee structure with very defined goals and membership. And in putting together those committees and those members, you do try to not only have a good representation of the stakeholders in terms of within the county structure and elected officials, but also within the community, and try to, you know, account in all of the work that you do to have that be a present and always very active consideration in making decisions and reviewing data and things like that. I don't know, Karen, Patrick, I don't know if you have other things to add to that, but that's my perspective on it. I think it always has to be a present piece. If the data, and looking at data, you have to know your data and know what it's representing and know where it's coming from. You know, is it good data? Is it reliable data?
Shelley, I'll just follow up by saying that that a lot of what is in the report is probably uncomfortable. And that's why you bring someone like us in, is so, you know, if there is an elephant in the room, that we can identify that and bring it to light. If these conversations are uncomfortable, I would argue that the conversations especially need to take place. Because it needs to get to the point where the community can have a frank, honest, problem-solving discussion about how we address all of these issues. And that's probably editorializing on my part, but that's one of the benefits of having a Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, is that people have, you know, theoretically a safe environment to raise some of these issues, and especially as it relates to criminal justice.
Thank you for that reply. So it's been my personal experience that those conversations get heated easily. And I know we want to do the best for our, you know, criminal justice system. What advice would you suggest as far as training to be able to step back and look at this neutrally, benefiting the community?
That is a very good question. I don't know from my experience that I have anything really to recommend or to specifically to point you towards. Karen, Patrick, do you have other experiences from your?
So Patrick mentioned earlier, and sorry, I think I cut you off, Patrick, but he mentioned earlier that training is available to form these criminal justice coordinating councils through the National Institute of Corrections. Their funding is real tight this time of the year, so I would suggest October 1st at 1 o'clock in the morning that you make your request to either have virtual facilitation of some of this discussion, or if you can actually get someone on site. But they are trained to help you set up the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee so that it is prepared to identify what the gaps are in people's capacity, whether they do need specific training or whether it just needs to be a forum where these discussions can take place. And they can help you outline kind of an agenda of what should be addressed. You know, what's the low-hanging fruit, and what are some things that might take a little bit of time after the team really forms well together and gels and is able to focus on problem solving.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And one last question. We talked about accountability and oversight. One of the comments, and nothing against the sheriff, this is one of the comments, it's always the sheriff knows best. And, you know, again, going back to the data, what is the data saying? Having that accountability and oversight. What structures or what power does this committee have? in order to make decisions that are benefiting the county and not just one person making the decisions?
That's a great question. So one of the benefits of a CJCC is that, that everyone comes to the table with an understanding of what decisions can be made by the council and what can't. So those individuals, prosecutor, sheriff, community organizers, you all, the quorum court, you have some authority within your county ordinances or whether it be state statute or whatnot about what you can and cannot do. And the expectation of a CJCC is that you're not ceding that authority or that decision making to the council, but that you're making decisions collaboratively. And so that's why one of the reasons why when you put together a collaborating council, either the department head or the elected official is actually the individual who's at the table, so that when recommendations are being made and discussions are going on and changes are being recommended, or you identify that piece of low-hanging fruit where it's like, well, it's just that easy, I can just add an e-signature and carry on and this will be rectified. You have the people at the table who can make those decisions. But at the same time, you can, the spirit of a CJCC is not to sort of force an entity to do something that either they statutorily can't, the County Board Ordinance of Authority doesn't allow them to do, or ultimately that they don't want to do. And so you find yourselves engaged in these really, really heated discussions about why something should happen or could happen, but you have a party, a stakeholder who's not willing to do that. And so, there will be those painful discussions, there will be those painful experiences of somebody just saying no, whether it's because they want to be difficult or because they're just not seeing the same path that you are. I've been part of many of those discussions in my prior life as a CJCC coordinator, and my biggest benchmark is an elected official who would bring a stack of files with him to our meetings and would say no to everything. But over time, that pile decreased. And then eventually he stopped bringing other work with him and was engaged and fully on board. His answer to everything was still no, but we were able to get past that and to really impact some change. So it all comes, it's sort of like a memorandum of understanding that you have with agencies or with folks. Like you set the expectations about what will be shared, what people are expected to bring, and then what people are expected to take away. I got really windy on that. I apologize.
JP Jenkins has your hand up. I will unmute you.
Thank you, Attorney Lester, and thank you so much, Mrs. Kern, for being with us tonight and sharing your findings and all of your hard work. All three of you did an extraordinary job at presenting for us. I just had one question on the lacking of pretrial services finding, where we're talking about suggestions like universal screening and risk assessment and reentry services in general. Is there a good example or a direction you can point us to look at where that's taken place before, and it's been successful, where we could look at good ideas and see some examples?
We're all nodding our heads. I'll defer to Karen on this one, and Patrick, I'll do a little less talking here.
Karen, do you want to go first or me?
Go ahead and go first, because I don't want to take up all your time.
Yeah, there's a ton of different jurisdictions that have done exactly this. The two with which I've worked most closely are Camden County, New Jersey, that went from a federal court order overseeing their jail population to where pretrial services reduced them to below their capacity in fairly short order. Obviously, Orange County, Florida, where I worked and started my criminal justice career, are the two that come to mind. most any large jurisdiction at this point has some flavor of pretrial services in place. Camden County and Orange County, what I think is unique about them, not necessarily unique, but what makes them a textbook example is that every single person is assessed by pretrial services. The system is mature enough where the judges trust the recommendations from pretrial staff, such that there's a good partnership, if you will, between the pretrial staff and the judiciary. But Karen's probably got many more examples than that.
Yeah, so thank you. And there are plenty of other examples. I worked in Arlington, Virginia, and it's a jurisdiction very similar to yours, quite frankly. And, you know, in Arlington, the Commonwealth's attorney or prosecutor actually said this program exists only due to the largesse of my office. So, you know, this is one of those areas where it is a program that people have to buy into. And I will say there was a jurisdiction I worked with years ago, and the prosecutor would provide every bit of discovery as soon as they got it. And I said, well, that's unusual. You know, why are you doing that? He said, half of the time, if I provide the information to the public defender, they're going to say, look, whomever, you know, arrestee, you need to start thinking about some kind of, you know, you need to start thinking about whether we really want to take this to court or not, because you have a history that is indicative of someone who's going to continue to commit crime. So, you know, that opportunity, and what pretrial does is brings all this information together so everyone can see the information. I will say just 2 quick points. The Vera Institute is a great resource to find out where all the pretrial programs are in the nation. And the other point is, and supporting the CJCC, federal funding nowadays really requires collaboration amongst jurisdictions. And so to receive any grant funds through the state, through federal funds through the state or grants, this type of collaboration is the direction that we're heading as a nation. And so it's a great opportunity to get started early and make sure you have those resources available.
I think Mrs. Kern had another point.
I have one thing to add to that. So this last round of federal funding, which came out earlier this year, so like February, March, April, maybe a little bit later than that, there was for the first time a Bureau of Justice Assistance had a grant to support the creation of and the work of a CJCC. And that was the first time I'd seen that. There'd been other sort of ways you could get crafty with BJA solicitations in the past to get that done. But this year was the first year that I'd seen that solicitation. And it was for, you know, 3 years, a good amount of good seed money to help you put a CJCC in place, support the operations of it by having staff or whatever other pieces you would need. So that's something also that I would monitor, and we can certainly send you the link to that solicitation from this year so you have it and know what to watch for next year should it come around again.
That would be great. Thank you. For sure. And thank
Anybody else on Zoom that has any questions for Ms. Cern? Jeffy Lemming, I'll turn it back over to you guys and see if it's a little bit better for us to hear you.
Patrick's got something to say.
Can you guys hear us okay?
We can.
Okay, good. I've got a few points that I want to walk through on the report. I don't know if you guys have that to where you can reference it or not. But I want to highlight some things and see if you guys have any more comments on it. Yeah. You guys were pretty, I'm looking at right around page 32, 30, 31, 32. You guys seem to be pretty complimentary about some of the things that were already going on, and like the jail ombudsman and the Bell project. So those were kind of, I would consider, for lack of a better word, pilot programs for us in the county. Are those things that you would continue to recommend or that we should expand upon? And I'll just let anybody who feels like they're the expert jump in on that.
Brian, could you hear us?
Yeah, we heard you. I've unmuted everyone so they can speak.
Okay.
So Shelley, I don't know if you want to take this, but I think it reinforces what Patrick was saying earlier and Shelley indicated that that the data needs to drive whatever program, whatever you can identify as programs that are working and options that are working. And at this point, it appears that there's a lot of success with any intervention that you all are making other than just straight incarceration, but the data need to drive any future decisions. And I would suggest Patrick weigh in on that and then Shelley kind of wrap it up for us.
I'm a statistics nerd, frankly, and to me, data analysis in many ways runs the world that we live in, and any jurisdiction in the year 2020 really needs to let data, as long as the data are converted to information that everybody trusts, that needs to drive the bus, so to speak.
And I would agree. And that doesn't mean that if you look at the data, one sort of caveat to the data piece is that if you're looking at data and you're monitoring data and you find that, you know, as we've noted, the bail project is working, or whatever project whatever piece, whatever alternative you have in place in the system is working. If you continue to monitor that data and you're getting data in that shows maybe there's been a shift in trends or a shift in use, just because you start something doesn't mean you have to keep it forever. And so it's using data to both to add and to take away or to readjust, right? And in theory, well, not in theory, in practice, you're always adjusting. Any of us who've ever run a program, the way you write it in paper initially and the way it implements is different. And then the way it looks in 6 months is different. And the way it looks in a year is different. And some of those changes are good, but some of those are just happen due to drift and things like that of naturally running programs. And so you want to be able to always keep that in mind as well.
On page 32 of the report, there's a figure, and it's figure number 7. And you guys you touch on it very briefly. You talk about how the bail project's been operating, but they operate with a limit of $5,000 bonds. And you guys have a lot of data that shows, you know, not long after their implementation, the amount of bond, $5,000 or more, took quite a bit of a jump. Did you guys get any feedback or commentary even after the report to explain that?
We did not.
When I was reading the report, that really concerns me. I know there's a lot of healthy debate about the bail project and their mission, and I know there's people that conflict about it, but I guess I'll just read into it positively that our system can react to stimuli. Maybe that's what I'll read into that. But you guys didn't touch on it very much in your recommendations tonight, but it seems like FTAs, failures to appear, is basically a huge issue here in Washington County, and I thought the report was pretty emphatic that we needed to address that issue. There's things specifically in pretrial services that could help with that issue, is that correct? That's what I got from the report.
Correct, and that's why I think the overarching pretrial recommendation, you're right, tonight we didn't say that explicitly, but it would include a focus on that failure to appear rate and those individuals who do fail to appear. There are pieces that you can put into pretrial that help, you know, as Karen mentioned earlier, you know, to help individuals with managing obligations and with adding a layer of accountability that would help address the failure to appear rate. it could be as simple as reminders and calendars. It could be as complex as having somebody supervised by a case manager in an ongoing manner to check in with them, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatnot. It really, again, goes back to utilizing a risk and needs assessment to be able to understand your population and how you manage them and at what level of service they need at that point. Now, Patrick, Karen, you have other things to add, I'm sure.
A good statistically valid risk assessment, and there are several out there that can be employed, will do a comparatively good job at predicting where your risk is in terms of showing up for court.
So let me jump in there real quick too and touch on that. The risk assessment tool, because there's parts of the report too that stated that the judges don't necessarily evaluate the arrestee very well in terms of setting that bond, but that risk assessment is very important in that process too also, right?
Correct.
It is, and I'm glad that Shelley mentioned that it's a risk and needs assessment because, for example, if someone is a substance abuser, they are going to exhibit drug-seeking behaviors, and that makes them a little bit riskier. And so in many cases, if you can address the treatment needs, then you are also addressing the risk at the same time. And so those two pieces are important, not only in determining risk, but also if you're going to monitor someone on pretrial, it might be a requirement they are attending substance abuse education or they seek counseling or whatever the case may be as part of their conditions of release.
Another area of the report that I found interesting, and specifically I'm going to page 66, there's a couple figures on that page, figure 28 and 29. You guys addressed and highlighted that it seems like our court disposition times have really increased over the last few years. But the way I read the report, you stopped short of saying that that has really driven our jail population, and that really surprised me. Am I reading that correctly, or what more commentary can you provide us on that? It seems like those two, in my mind, would be naturally linked.
To me, they are inextricably linked. That I think you could get into a chicken versus egg proposition, but frankly, I think the story of the jail's population as it stands at the end of our run of data for our study is that it's very much a function of failures to appear and then rebookings back into the facility, which means you have more cases being put into a already existing backlog. And so time expands, and then it's really in many ways a vicious cycle because people then will fail to appear a second time or a third time. And then when they do get back before a judge, the judge being, I would imagine, fairly irritated with the defendant would be tempted to increase bond. And so that then is kind of a secondary wave of boosting the jail's population. So to me, they're absolutely inextricably linked as far as Washington County is concerned, just because the matter really is a function of failures to appear.
Great. So the report could be pretty depressing if you looked at it, specifically I'm looking at, I want to highlight to my fellow justices too, this is page 78. There's figures 43 and 44 on there, which give us a growth curve, and it looks like they're based on if nothing changes, if we took no action. And I think that should scare the hell out of all of us, that particular curve. I don't know that we could tax and build our way out of that problem if we thought expanding our jail was the only solution there. But if I want to just sum up what you guys are saying, there's a lot of work that we can do in our criminal justice system that can have a lot of improvement and a lot of positive change. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And if I may, and I hate to keep saying, well, back when I lived in Orlando, Florida, blah, blah, blah. But frankly, it's to me the perfect example of this, that when I joined the corrections department in Orange County, Florida, we had 1,100 more inmates than beds. We were about to face a federal consent decree. Consultants came in and made a graph exactly like the one that I'm looking at for figure 43 and 44 that I personally produced. We had 2 or 3 teams of consultants come in 2001, 2002, and 2003, showing those same exact growth curves. And the system knew that they couldn't build their way out of it. There were 6 brand new facilities, 6 facilities that were each about 2 years newer than the previous one. And it was going down the street with the size of the jail. And the county basically got to a point where they said, enough is enough. We can't keep building our way out and we need to do something. And that was really when, frankly, for that county, the county mayor and the chief judge for that circuit really gave teeth to case processing recommendations to try to streamline the process so that we weren't really turning the jail into necessarily a revolving door. It was just we were processing people more efficiently and doing things using technology and other ideas to try to offset that curve. And it was difficult. But with the cooperation of the key stakeholders, there was a pronounced reversal of the jail's population such that on Christmas morning, 2003, I woke up and we had 2,995 inmates. And I felt good about living in that community still, that we did not compromise public safety, but we did things faster, smarter, more efficiently, and with the buy-in of everybody in the process. So really, yes, the report in many ways is extremely depressing. I think you take it as a warning, not necessarily a prescription. No, you can't build your way out of it, but with changes, you can manage it and make sure that really, if you will, these graphs that I've produced in this report, I would hope, and here's a term, these constitute a self-destructing prophecy.
Wow. Well, let me continue with you, Patrick, since you're the self-described statistical nerd. I believe that's the term you used.
I did.
We have been told on this court for years, even before I got here, that this jail population was a direct product of our growth as a county, the general population, and that these curves were inevitable. We just have to build and keep doing what we're doing. And really, I just really want to drive this home. This report shows us that there are tons of other things that we need to be focusing on to improve this.
Yeah, your county is growing fairly quickly, but I've worked with other counties that have had much steeper growth curves. And frankly, while growth of the county does predict more people moving to the jurisdiction and more people, not everybody coming into the jurisdiction are going to avoid jail, that curve does not have to follow the population curve. Frankly, yes, bookings and intakes are 1/2 of the equation that drive a facility's population, but how long they stay in the system, how long they stay in custody is the other half. And that's something you can do something about.
Great. Well, here's my summation, and I want any of you guys to stop me if I'm wrong. We need to quit being preoccupied with just expanding our jail. I understand that that's our growth curve and our county population's an important thing, but there's a lot more work that we need to be focusing on, a lot more positive change that we need to be doing. I want to apologize to the sheriff from what I can do on this court, because I think we have spent years focusing on the wrong things, and I understand in my conversations with him that he's the last stop. He feels obligated to incarcerate the individuals that are brought to him and house them for the courts, and I think we've just really done him a disservice being so preoccupied with this expansion idea that we haven't done anything else to alleviate it. So a lot of these decisions, I think we've done a lot of great work. This is my first term on the court. A lot of these decisions have been pushed from prior courts. I just want to apologize for whatever it's worth to him for my role on this. And I really also want to say that you guys in your report, and I appreciated this a lot, change is inevitable. You had a whole section in there that talked about change, and that the worst thing we can do is basically sit on our hands and try to keep the status quo. And I invite I beg and pray that people on the court, and on the quorum court, in the courts, the public, everybody gets involved with this and gets motivated to do something here, because I think we can really do some good work. And the worst thing we can do is just continue what we're doing. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the NCSC and their team. I want to thank you guys so much for your work on this study.
Brian, JP Harveston's got some space.
Okay, I just want to kind of summarize this. If I understand the report, you feel that we need a CJCC committee where we have all the stakeholders involved in developing a pre-trial program. I think at one point in there you said, we recommend a robust pre-trial program. And I want to make sure, I don't know, as a quorum court, we can certainly push things, but I don't know that we can form the pre-trial programs that need to be done. So I hope, I've understood this report. We have population growth, we have failure to appear, we have drug and issues. One thing I found very interesting, that some of your data that you had in this report, you said that 30% of the drug arrests were just for drug paraphernalia. To me, that's very interesting, and I think, maybe we need to address this at the state legislature, because this is, 30% of our population. And of course, then we have our repeat offenders. So those are the four things. And, if I'm off track on this, please say so. And do you have other recommendations? I guess is what I'm saying. Or should we just stick to this kind of summary? I don't know, anybody heard me?
We heard you. We heard you. I had to be unmuted. Yes, your summary is accurate about the CJCC and failure to appears and the robust pretrial system. I think, are there additional recommendations? I think that we've been as thorough as we can be right now, given the charge of the project and the scope of the project and the data that we had. That said, the report provides, to an extent, a roadmap, right, of how to start to implement system change and how to start managing your system perhaps a little bit differently. And so as some of that work is done, I think there's always an opportunity for, more study and additional recommendations that come to play, whether you get some technical assistance from the National Institute of Corrections or any other entity. So that's where I'll leave it at that. I think right now, given the scope of our work, our recommendations are as thorough as they could be. I don't know, Karen or Patrick, if you have anything else to add.
Thank you.
Shelley, I think you summarized it nicely, and I would just add that I don't think there is anything in the report that Washington County and the very bright people in Washington County could not do on their own if the goal was to work together to identify the issues, to get the data that supports where the gaps are and what needs to be done. And I appreciate you mentioning about the pretrial program. The Criminal Justice Coordinating Council should be looking at the whole system, and the pretrial program being one small component of all of the options available to you to keep that jail population low, but yet keep the community safe. So I'd say the ultimate goal is that you all would be able to do everything that we talked about yourselves as you move forward in the future.
Thank you. Are there any more questions out of the JPs? The courtroom? We got one from Butch Pond.
Yes, whoever's listening, if you can hear from my being much farther around on the horseshoe, we're still testing this equipment. I was curious, and I mean, I can very well see that possibly the circuit judges and the prosecutor were needing some cooperation maybe from them in changing this program up. Is there anyone that's had in your study group that's had any experience in encouraging the circuit judges and the prosecutor and who all else you mentioned in the report, encouraging them to come on board and help us with this to keep this jail population down? Thank you.
I've personally seen at least 10 counties where the judges came on board. That when we say cooperation of all stakeholders, we mean all stakeholders. And you know, a good example, the very first project that I did away from Florida was Summit County, Ohio. It was Akron, Ohio. It was 2004, and that was the sheriff and the chief judge drove the program and you know, brought our team in, but it was really incumbent upon, nothing was going to work without the public defender and the prosecutor also cooperating. And it took about a year worth of meetings and frankly negotiations there for, you know, everybody to agree to try something different. And it took an additional year for the system to really hit its stride, but it worked. And I tell you what, when I flew home after my first presentation up in Akron, Ohio, I was convinced they would never get it fixed, because we couldn't sit everybody in the same room because of the lack of cooperation, or people saying no, kind of like what Michelle was saying, that people showing up with case files and just automatically saying no. There was a ton of that there. And 2 years later, they were working very efficiently, frankly, because they had to.
And a lot of times it's the mere awareness. And an example I'll share with Arlington County was our judges and prosecutor didn't necessarily want to be active participants. But after 6 years of operating as a criminal justice coordinating council, we watched our jail population go up 20%. We're trying to figure out why. And so we looked at the data, and it indicated that the increase in the number of inmates who were placed on a waiting list for a substance abuse program operated by the jail, this waiting list was driving that 20% increase in the population. So we brought that to the attention of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, didn't ask for anything, just shared the information that we had about 100 inmates sitting on a waiting list for a program that would be 9 months. So, you know, these inmates, had they gone into the state system, they would have been out long before that same period of time. But that mere awareness the judges started looking at community alternatives for those placements rather than placing them on the waiting list for that jail program. So many cases, it's just the awareness, and you can't unknow what you know. And so as that awareness kind of seeps in, then slow, small changes begin to happen.
Just to sew up, I'll let you in on a secret. The gentleman who kept bringing the cases was the prosecutor. And so he was the benchmark I couldn't publish in the county budget book every year, was how, his files kept reducing and he became engaged. I think that I don't know that you could have a successful, well-organized CJCC without the judiciary, because so much of what happens is based on their decision-making and their role and the work that they do. And so just to echo what Karen and Patrick have already said is, my experience is also, low-hanging fruit and looking at failure to appears for minor traffic. In my jurisdiction, we had minor traffic cases coming at 8:30 in the morning. And because so many individuals who were coming to that calendar call were cited with operating after revocation, they were reliant upon taking public transit across county lines to get to that 8:30 court appointment, and they wouldn't make it. And then they'd get a fail to appear, and that would just start cycling out because they were not supposed to be driving to get to their court appearance. And so we shifted that back just 90 minutes and reduced our failure to appear rate significantly. And we couldn't have done that without the support of the judiciary.
JP Lemming, I believe JP Yanez has another question.
So thank you so much. Yes, I'm going to echo JP Deakins. I'm so glad that we have data now because it takes it from a personal level to we're looking at the reality. So I appreciate you all. But the one question I have for Patrick, in analyzing our data, did you see any data that we should be collecting that we're not?
That's dangerous.
There's always more data to collect. Wow, that is an amazing question. And I'm totally unprepared for that. Shelly's gonna bail me out on this because Shelly had, not to drive the bus over Shelly, but Shelly asked me as we were finalizing the report, I think 3 or 4 questions where I came back and said, nope, we don't have that data. Now that information might be collected, it's just that we did not get it in our pool of data, which frankly was an awful lot of data. It was an impressive amount of data that we were provided. But Shelly's racking her brain trying to think of what it was, but there were...
Was it around continuances?
Yeah. Court continuances. It was a little bit unclear with the court data exactly when a continuance motion was made and when it was granted. And I did have some difficulty, frankly, tying court data with jail data. It wasn't impossible. It was just very hard. And I think we would have needed a significant amount of time to be able to do a deeper analysis of the court case processing data for the in custody population versus the population that was out of custody, which I think is a valuable exercise. And that's something that will inevitably have to be done because assuming that everything falls in line and a CJCC is established, inevitably there are going to be indicators of system efficiency that need to be followed. For instance, how long does an individual sit in custody awaiting a probation violation hearing or some other type of hearing? That is something that should be at the fingertips of every interested individual in the system. and it's a measure of system health. There's probably 10 indicators that, for that needs to be done. That information might very well reside. The data might actually exist there. We didn't have it, but it is something that needs to be converted into regularly available information.
Now, if
Great
you can think of,
question.
well, some of my questions you can't have an answer just right away, but but if you do think of anything else, do you mind sending it our way?
Of course, happy to. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate you.
Of course.
JP Lemming, I don't see anyone else raising their hands to ask any questions.
Okay, again, I just want to tell them thank you for their study and thank you for the hard work. Let's go to item number 6, discussion of the detention service intergovernmental agenda.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, sorry.
I wish the sheriff was coming here to explain some of this, but the data that we took off of the agenda shows that it now costs $76.57 to keep a person in jail. And I really want to know what that includes, because we have added medical services. They have contracted that out since I've been on the court, and they get that free when they're in the jail. The only time that the feds pay for that is if they're taken outside of the jail. And I just wondered if that was included in this contract. So, I think it's something we need to look into.
I got a text I was looking up a text to see if I could get it right quick, but I got a text from the sheriff the other day, and he said that had been moved up to like $87.
Oh, okay.
And I was gonna
include that medical expense thing.
I was gonna pull up my text and see if I
JP
could
Lemming,
have that.
JP's Sheriff Helder is able to speak now.
Sheriff, there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So first of all, I want to brag on Captain Kenny Yates. Kind of tasked him with approaching our U.S. Marshals to renegotiate our contract. Through a lengthy process, we've settled on and been approved for $80 a day, which is an $18 a day increase. The contract has not been formalized or signed. We anticipate that to be done by October 1st. I talked to Chairman Johnson about this and kind of briefly explain what that means budgetary wise. If we were to hold 60, which is what the number was the other day, our increase just based on that contractual agreement would be about $1,100 a day. And that's significant to our budget. So kudos to Kenny for working hard on that project. I think that's going to help us out in a budgetary manner now. Ann, I think you were questioning how do we come up with this this magic number, what it costs to hold a detainee per day. There are a number of things that go into that. There's a form that we have to fill out that takes in bricks and mortar, utilities, food, medical, all the things that go into housing everybody. Then it's extrapolated out on an average day holding. So that number can vary. But I will say that the $80 rate regionally will be at the top of anybody that's being paid within probably a 200 or 300 mile radius.
Thank you.
Patrick's got a question.
I have several questions going through this interlocal agreement, memorandum of understanding, whatever you want to call it. First off, in the packet, I don't know if you have it to reference, but in 2017, the AAC released a report that combined a lot of different jail cost data, and Washington County was included in that. It included two figures And I'm not really sure what the distinction is between them. One is cost per day reported, and then the other one is cost per day verified. The cost per day reported was $91.14, and the cost per day verified was $76.57. Do you have any insight, Sheriff, on what the difference between those numbers is and how accurate they are?
Well, from a historical standpoint, there were some numbers that were included in that $90 figure that should not have been put in. And then whenever it went through all the process, it was verified that those numbers were wrong. And we got that rectified, and we're very transparent with that with the court. That was somebody in the comptroller's office, I think. I can't recall. But at any rate, it was an innocent mistake. But the 70 number is still a little high, based on history and what we're able to get from all the input, but it's much more realistic than the $90 number.
Yeah, I'm very interested, and I think before the pandemic hit and we lost track of what we were all doing, you know, I talked to Shannon and said, let's come up with what we think it costs us per day to house an inmate. You guys might already be pretty close to that, but I'd like to see that analysis. Not what we can get reimbursed for, or not what the state says what is our cost that we could reconcile back to the county? And I'd be very interested in that.
I'll be happy to provide a copy of the worksheet that Kenny utilized to provide to the marshals to verify what our actual costs are. And also part of that contract is an hourly rate for transportation whenever we're tasked with transporting federal prisoners to and fro, that will offset our costs more than what our actual costs are. So that's a good thing as well.
Let me ask you this. Does it cost us more in your mind to hold a federal detainee than it would a quote unquote normal detainee? I mean, my understanding has always been there's housing requirements and transportation requirements, et cetera, that are higher and above what is required of a normal detainee. For the federal marshals require a higher level of care, I guess I would say. Is that true?
Not that I'm aware of. The standards are the same across the board. What the Arkansas standards meet the federal requirements. Our jail is at a certain level that the federal government is very comfortable with our ability to hold and make sure that their detainees and prisoners are held and treated appropriately. I think the only thing that's added in are the transport costs and requirements there, but they are paying us for that service when and if we have to provide those services.
Great. I'd like to switch gears a little bit. I had also added to the packet our current agreement that was signed in 2015 for the federal per diem rate. Are you pretty familiar with that? That's the one that I think it's instituted the $62 a day fee.
Patrick, I didn't hear the first part of your question. I'm sorry.
I just said I had included that agreement with the agenda packet so that we could reference it.
And that was the $62 a day per diem rate?
Right.
Is that what you're referring to?
I'm just making sure you have it or familiar with it.
I am to a certain degree. And I don't know where you're going with the question, but I am familiar with it.
Okay. On the back, it's page 13 of the attachment, but it's page 10 of 14 of that agreement. Down there about right at halfway through the page, it said that after 36 months, we could have asked for an adjustment to that $62 a day. And I'm just trying to see that if we signed this in 2015, that means roughly we could have asked for an adjustment in December of 2018. Is that the understanding of the agreement?
Yes.
Did we ask for an adjustment?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so this newest increase that you and I'm sorry, I forgot his title.
Captain Yates.
Captain Yates have secured is the most up to date we have.
That's correct.
Okay. Is that 36-month window, is that something that's standard that we have to accept, or is that something that we can negotiate with the feds?
I think that is the first opportunity you have to renegotiate To be quite frank and honest, it's just something we've been so busy chasing our tails. I think it's something that slips through the cracks, but we now have put in place a notification process that every 3 years we'll revisit.
Yeah, I would really, really appreciate your help keeping on top of that. I would like to see if the feds would let us just adjust that in shorter term or shorter windows than 36 months. I mean, we all know our costs go up on quite a bit, but I guess it worries me and bothers me that, we fight a lot over dollars and budgeting and stuff like that, and essentially we've missed almost a couple years of a raised rate that we didn't ask for. That could have been a considerable amount of money, I guess, is where I'm going with that. I know I appreciate you, and I know you do a lot, but I would like that to be prioritized more in the future.
Yeah, as far as the doing it annually or whatever, it's figured in that it's 36 months. That was a miss on our part as far as researching that, but we'll be on top of that from now on. But 3 years is the cap. We're not by contract able to revisit that prior to 3 years.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any more questions? Brian, you have any more questions out there in Zoom?
No, we do not.
Sheriff, I didn't say thank you, and thank you.
You're welcome, Willie. Thank you all.
If there's no more questions, it's time for public comment.
That's correct. And right now we have some people waiting. The first person I'll unmute will be Beth Koger.
Okay, thank you. Beth, you're up.
Thank you. Am I unmuted now? Okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the meeting tonight. It's been great to hear from the National Center of State Courts and what we need to do. And now that we have that report, that is a blueprint of what we must do. We have to use that blueprint and build a foundation. The foundation will be the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee. We have to get that right. There are also numerous sources available to guide us in doing that. Some were mentioned tonight, but we also have other jurisdictions where they already have robust and successful CJCCs. Particularly, we've been to view the one to attend meetings at the one in Oklahoma City, and they are very successful. We could talk to them about how they formed their committee. But two things that stand out to me in the most successful CJCCs, in addition to the fact that they must include all the stakeholders that as we've talked about tonight, they have to be free to operate without political influence. And they have to have one or more staff members whose job is solely to work for the CJCC. So what I would like to say is I just would urge the court to, we just have to get it right. We have to be successful in this. And I want to urge the court to be strong, to make tough decisions, to make it happen. And I would ask the court, can we start on it tomorrow, September 2nd? Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Brian, are there any more?
I have Stan Edelman that I will unmute.
Stan, you're up.
Good evening, everybody. Am I unmuted and can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Great to be back with you. And I can really make things as brief as possible because my comments, I did submit a 4-page commentary, which I hope everybody has. Be happy to take any questions on that. But basically what my commentary is bravo, thank you, NCSC, for, again, kind of showing us the path forward. And I want to really address two things. And it's been said before this evening, so part of it is redundant, and pardon me for that. But the first recommendation of having robust pretrial services is something that will pay off in so many different ways. It'll pay off in terms of being able to help people put their lives together. If their issue is substance abuse, if their issue is whatever behavioral manifestations are getting them in trouble with the law. And it will also have a double payoff in terms of reducing population, which is what we're all about here. An intervention point here, when somebody has been arrested, it's an opportunity to intervene again with the root causes. Again, I've outlined that in my 4-page document to you. So I can't recommend that strongly enough, and I can't thank the National Center strongly enough either. And secondly, which has been what I've been harping on, frankly, ever since I went to work for you last July, the FTA practices have to change. And I've lit that up in boldface because it is so self-defeating, the approach that we've been taking to FTAs, in just 2 ways. One is making for less FTAs in the first place by providing services, by providing transportation so that people don't miss court. But secondly, when there is a failure to appear, what the practice has been, and absolutely dramatically highlighted in the NCSC report, and a spreadsheet that I submitted a few months ago, the bonds for FTA that approximate or exceed bonds for the most violent felonies is self-defeating. There are so many better ways to go about that. So I see my time is up, but those are the 2 ways. If Mr. Chair, may I have maybe 1 more minute, if it's possible?
If someone so moved to do that, that'd be fine with me. We have a
Thank you.
we have a motion
I'll second.
and a second to let Stan go another minute.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, JPs. What can fall to the quorum court to do has been done in other jurisdictions. I worked a couple of lifetimes ago in Middlesex County, Massachusetts, a urban and suburban and rural county, not unlike Washington County, where the jail itself put into their budget initially on a law enforcement grant, a federal grant, to have caseworkers in the jail who again can link up to needed services and can help people put their lives back together. I would commend that to the sheriff, to the quorum court, to build into the next budget cycle the existence of caseworkers in the jail who can provide, again, the report uses the word robust services. And with that, again, I just have to just second virtually everything that's in the report. It is showing us the way to go. Thank you. If there's time for a question, I'd be happy to answer one.
Thank you, Stan. Does anybody got any questions for Stan? Brian, are there any more public comment?
There are no more hands raised for public comment.
Well, I'd just like to say thank everybody for the meeting tonight, and thanks for the participation, and we could have a motion to adjourn, we'll adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion by Patrick and seconded by Ian. This meeting will be adjourned.